Hello and welcome back to World Leader Leaderboard, the podcast where we discuss every world leader and tell you who's winning and losing each week. This week I'm joined by Rory,
hello,
Georgina,
hello,
and Nadja.
Hello.
How are you all doing?
Great.
A silent nod is such a good answer from a whole panel on a podcast. As we stand, this is how the World Leaderboard looks like. This is how it looked at the end of last episode, but today we will be moving 5 people on the board as selected by the panel. We'll be moving one person that you've chosen, plus we'll be adding a brand new person to the board. Will it be a winner? Will it be a loser? Will they be wearing a hat? So many questions to get to, and we will find out as the episode goes on. As always, though, we should start with the people who are doing well this week and start with our winners of the week. Okay, Georgina, let's start with you. Who are we moving up on the board first? Who's our first winner of the week?
Our first winner of the week is El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, whose Twitter bio was formerly world's coolest dictator, and he may now be about to become the world's newest dictator. This is because El Salvador's Congress has passed a series of constitutional reforms to scrap presidential term limits, so you can run as many times as you want, and various other smaller reforms, including bringing forward the next presidential election from 2029 to 2027, and also extending term limits from 5 to 6 years. And this has understandably been viewed by critics and defenders of democracy worldwide as a power grab or a move to concentrate power in the hands of Bukele. And some comparisons have been made, for example, with a 2009 referendum that Venezuela passed at the time when President Hugo Chavez was in power. And that has now, over time, led to effectively a dictatorship under Maduro, who lost the 2024 election, at least according to observers, and yet is still in power. So people in Latin America and worldwide are concerned about what this means for the future of El Salvador's democracy. These reforms were actually passed by 57 lawmakers in the Legislative Assembly, and only 3 opposition figures voted against it. This is largely because Bukele has such a strong majority that I think 90% of the Salvadoran parliament is from Bukele's Nuevas Ideas party. So overall, this is good news for Bukele himself if he sees himself staying in power for a very long time, which is what this signals. But it's bad news for El Salvador's democracy and the kind of long tradition of dictators in Latin America as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Bukele then moving up from the lightly positive section to the straight positive section. What's the reaction been in El Salvador? As you say, he has a big majority in their parliament, so clearly a lot of people voted for him last time round. Is this a move that's being welcomed by El Salvadorians, or are they equally concerned?
It's been mixed. I think because Bukele has such massive popularity, he has an approval rating of, by some figures, 80%, by some above 90. And a lot of the population supports his crackdown on crime, effectively. Because under Bukele, the crime rate, homicide rate has dropped enormously. And by some stats, El Salvador is now a safer country than Sweden.
Wow.
And people are feeling this, so he's a massively popular figure. But again, it's what this means long term. And even if in the short term, people are very happy with how he's running the country and the fact that they feel safe now, if this becomes, a feature of Salvadoran democracy where votes and elections aren't actually free, or, it paves the way for Bukele to claim rigged election or cry election fraud, things that we've seen from other countries with similarly authoritarian-leaning leaders, I think in the long term it doesn't bode well. But something else to say is that on this specific reform about moving the next presidential election forward to 2027, this is also because it's to synchronize El Salvador's elections so that municipal, legislative, and presidential elections are all happening in the same year. And again, as a voter, that might sound like a good thing because it's simpler. It's like, one set of elections for everything. But again, what this signals is a kind of concentration of power in the hands of the ruling party across various elections and different levels of government. So Yeah, it's a good question about how it's been received, and I think right now it's too early to say. We should also say that with some of the news that we're getting out of El Salvador, one of the other things Bukele has done as president is crack down on critics, on dissent, kind of chasing journalists out of the country. So even if there were more opposition within the country, chances are we might not hear about it because it might not reach us.
Yeah, to build on what Georgina said, I think it's incredibly worrying, even if it's not very surprising, given that he's never really given the impression that he would do anything else, I think.
Sure.
But he's like mid-40s, I think. So this isn't like a sort of aged leader who's trying to get, the last few years of his life remaining in power. He could be, if, all goes to his plan, he could be in power for a very, very long time. But I think what's also quite worrying is that within Latin America, there have been recent quite significant backslides away from democracy in like Venezuela, like Georgina said, also like Nicaragua. But the Trump administration really is not that interested in democracy in Latin America. So when Biden was in, he was very strong on, fighting for democracy. He put a lot of pressure on Brazil to uphold the results of the election between Bolsonaro and Lula, and also in Guatemala. But now, obviously, Bukele is a big ally of Trump. He's really got no interest in trying to stop El Salvador going in that direction. So I think that's quite a worrying trend.
Yeah, absolutely. We've spoken a lot internally about what, if anything, we'd like to do around the concept of the death of democracy and democratic backsliding around the world, whether that's a video series or an issue of too long or whatever else. I think it's something that's been on our mind for a while, especially, even since Trump's first term, obviously all the discussion around January 6th and whatever else. So it looks like we're only getting more examples of that happening around the world, and maybe something we should follow up on more broadly.
A final point on this Bukele thing is that Bukele himself has defended these reforms by drawing a parallel with other Western democracies, particularly in Europe. And he posted on X something saying that if you look at parliamentary systems around the world that don't have term limits, and it's true that all 26 European countries that have a prime minister don't have limits on how many times that candidate can run. And Bukele was trying to say, the only reason people are kicking off is because El Salvador is a poor country and you all just want to hate on us because you can. But actually, the checks and balances that exist in other cases in Western or European democracies that have a prime minister are there to prevent the kind of concentration of power that Bukele is clearly gunning for. So it's not quite an argument that he can make legitimately because, he's installed all of his party loyalists across the Supreme Court. He's chasing out journalists from the country. He's not letting media in to, say, the massive super prison where El Salvador held those 250 Venezuelan deportees from the US. So actually, it's not really an argument that Bukele can make in good faith.
But one he's clearly trying to make, and maybe is going down well with some in the country, at least for the moment. Bukele then moving up on our board. Rory, let's jump over to you. Who is your winner of the week?
So my winner of the week is French President Emmanuel Macron, who, and again, with Macron, you can always split his sort of life into two sections, his political life. There's the domestic side, which is going very poorly in France. His unpopularity has risen further, and there's budgetary issues, and his prime minister is very unpopular. But putting all that aside, on the world stage, he had a recent test of his diplomatic influence, and he really showed off his strength in that regard. So Macron's decision for France to recognize Palestine in September has set off a bit of a wave of other Western countries doing the same. So I think the UK, Malta, Canada have also followed his lead. Slightly different situations, some conditional, some unconditional.
Yeah.
Portugal's considering it. Finland is sort of leaning towards it as well. Germany's coming under increasing pressure. So it's a real sign that where Macron leads, others can and will follow. I think last year we had, I think it was Norway, Spain, Ireland, Slovenia recognized Palestine. That was sort of a block of countries that are already quite pro-Palestinian.
Yeah.
They didn't, inspire the larger sort of the, G7 type countries to do the same, whereas Macron's move has done that. I think it was a big gamble on his part, because he had been trying to drum up support among allies to try and make some kind of joint declaration. He didn't seem to be making progress on that. And then the war with Iran threw things off schedule. And he eventually came back to it. And with his announcement, it was effectively an unconditional recognition and pretty unilateral. No one else sort of came along with him. And that was the gamble. If I do this, will other people follow? Or is it just going to be a symbolic move that no one doesn't actually sort of pressure anyone else to do the same? But it worked. And I think that is a big win for him and sort of French diplomacy in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, exactly mirroring what we just did with Bukele. Macron moving from lightly positive to full positive. The top of the board looking quite crowded, really. There's a lot of people pretty firmly in the top part. You obviously talked there about the influence France has in the other countries making the move. What kind of reasons are France and other countries giving for making this move now? Obviously, we're seeing increased humanitarian issues and catastrophes in the region. Is that the primary justification being given, or is this a more broad shift?
I think the thing that these countries are saying is that they're trying to get back to a two-state solution, get that back on track, as that looks increasingly unviable based on what's going on. But I think fundamentally, it is just what's happening in Gaza that's forced their hand. And they, each leader of the different countries that are doing this have said slightly different things. And they've tried to make it less like they're just directly having a go at Israel. But that is fundamentally why it's happening. But in Macron's case, his announcement was actually in response to a letter from the president of the Palestinian Authority. And in that letter, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, committed to a load of sort of governance reforms and also condemned the October 7th attack. So that sort of gave Macron the space to make that announcement. And in the same way, you've got like the UK making its recognition of Palestine conditional. They're trying to like lay the groundwork for it to happen rather than it just being like a big... Yeah,
and I suppose then it makes it easier from their perspective that they can say, well, we didn't want to do this. This isn't like some... Well, maybe we didn't not want to, but like, this isn't something we're just forcing upon you. Israel were warned. They decided not to act in the way we thought was necessary, and therefore you can kind of move the blame around a little bit.
The kind of mirror image moment to this as well is that the Arab states have also, since a number of Western nations have come out and declared their intention to recognize Palestine, condemned Hamas for the first time. So there's kind of these two movements happening in opposite directions, again, as part of this really urgent now push for peace and push for a two-state solution. Something else to mention.
And have we seen any change in the US's stance? Because obviously, ultimately, they are one of the major influences, if not the major influence in this region. They presumably haven't been swayed by Macron.
Yeah, it's funny. Strange, funny that Trump does come out and sometimes say things that are quite critical of Israel, in the sense that he'll acknowledge mass starvation that's happening there, even though Israel will deny it. But the US government, its position is that these moves to recognize Palestine are bad, sort of unproductive, and sort of using the Israeli line is like, a reward for terror. So they definitely haven't been moved by this. But I think that sort of just reflects the fact that these countries, France, the UK, Canada, just are accepting the fact that the US isn't going to be moved on this, and that they've just got to do it themselves.
Well, interesting that Macron is the one making that shift. As you say, a leader with a real divergence between their international and domestic lives, and moving up because of the international side, as I think is more common for Macron. He's rarely moving up for his domestic politics. Finally then, Nadja, who is your winner this week?
So my winner of this week is the President of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum. There's a few reasons why. I'm going to start just talking about some domestic politics. Essentially, Sheinbaum, if you don't already know, for a bit of context, she came into power late last year as a the successor of AMLO and the Morena Party, who are widely popular and widely seen as transforming Mexico. And she's kind of she was basically taken under his wing and pushed into the spotlight to kind of carry on his social reforms and pushing Mexico into, a better, more development and a better future. And essentially, even though her term has so far, she's only been a few months, her approval ratings are just insanely high. They're one of the highest approval ratings in not only in Latin America, but across the world, and something we've talked about a number of times on the podcast. But there's a few more wins that have happened in the recent week, which, make her a real winner. Talking domestics, one study was released last week, I think, by the National Institute of Statistics and Geography, the Mexican Institute, that said that income inequality has reached its lowest level since the 80s. So that was measured for the previous year, 2024, but which is not necessarily when Sheinbaum was in power the entire time of the year, but it's just to showcase how much Sheinbaum, the Morena Party, which he's part of, have been kind of pushing for social equality, and the results are really coming through. There's also a number of security policy measures that she's kind of implemented in the past few weeks as well that have started to see really considerable big results. This is another policy that her predecessor, AMLO, was as well really keen on. So AMLO was basically just pushing for, his campaign was called Hugs Not Bullets, and essentially just kind of trying to get rid of all of the crime and corruption that's plaguing Mexico. And he didn't do, his results were a bit more mixed when it was his term.
Sure.
But in recent weeks, some of Sheinbaum's policies, her security policies, they've been saying that the results are coming through, and there's been a massive decrease. And part of this is to do with Trump, his kind of threat on Mexico to reduce the amount of fentanyl trafficking, and any kind of drug trafficking that's coming into America has kind of pushed Claudia Sheinbaum and her policy team to kind of really start cracking down on this, because as you all know, Trump is still threatening, he's threatening the rest of the world with tariffs. And that actually leads me on to my second point, which is that Sheinbaum has done really, really well on that whole tariff front with Trump. So I think 2 days ago, last Friday, he gave Mexico another 90-day extension on putting tariffs on Mexico, which is also just a really big thing. There's a handful of countries, that have already received really big tariffs. Obviously, the EU trade deal happened last week. Switzerland got 39% or 41% tariff. But Mexico has continuously been able to Sheinbaum has continuously been able to push Trump to carry on with these extensions. And the trade deals going on between them seem like they're really, it looks like it's coming out. It's going to be a good result for Mexico. That's essentially why she's moving up this week. Good all round. 10 out of 10s.
Nice. Sheinbaum then not only getting 10 out of 10s from Nadja, but also moving right to the top of the board, which is...
Was that her first time on the top rung?
Good question. I would imagine so, yeah.
She's been very close for a long time.
She has. I mean, as Nadja said, she's been a popular leader in the first kind of year, is it now she's been in office?
And I think definitely she hasn't reached the top, because you can see she hasn't moved around in a while.
Sure. Oh, I see what you mean. The fact that she's so far to the left, that does imply
it's about time to bring her up, I think.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Oh, do they always move to the rightmost? No way.
Is that true?
That's the first time I've ever realised that they always go on
because Bukele hadn't moved for ages, has he? So he was on
Michael Martin hasn't moved since.
Oh my gosh, that's changed how I see the board.
Yeah.
This is crazy.
That's why Trump is always on the end of...
yeah, it's true.
Because he's
and
always
Zelensky
moving.
and Putin.
Whoa.
This is interesting
Guys.
data.
Wow.
Just to be clear on what we're saying, new people when they're moved on the board are always added to the right-hand side. So the people on the right have been moved most frequently, and the ones on the left have been in their current position the longest.
God,
that has
Xi
changed how
Jinping.
we're all looking at the board.
Yeah.
So
Xi
Xi Jinping is consistently top left.
He's certainly been in the top left longer than all the other people have, and he's got a +2.
Oh yeah,
I think we just haven't
true.
touched Xi in a while. I feel like it's been quite a long time since
I think that, and also it's hard to get to the top of the board anyways. So
and once you're there, you're locked in. Really, it seems. Before we get back to Scheinbaum, this is interesting because we're soon going to be announcing a bonus series for World Leader Leaderboard, which will play with this very phenomena of people who haven't moved on the board frequently. So expect an announcement soon, and expect some more tumult on the board as we shake things up and as we move people around more. So Xi Jinping, watch your back. He could just get another +1. He could end up on +3. Who knows? You mentioned tariffs, obviously, there. One of the things that she's meant to do is kind of push off these tariffs. That's presumably in part because America relies on Mexico a lot for imports. And also, I mean, a lot of companies that were trying to avoid Chinese and various other limits and tariffs have been kind of moving their productions to Mexico. They've seen a big increase in kind of manufacturing in recent years. Do you think that's something that's going to continue being kicked down the road? Or are there signs between Mexico and the US that there is chance of them also getting a trade deal soon?
Yeah, I think there's really good chances that Mexico and the US will be able to get a trade deal soon. And I think that's also in part of kind of Scheinbaum's really strong economic policies for Mexico. So she unveiled a plan during like the first start of her term that's called Plan Mexico. It's a 6-year economic plan to essentially integrate Mexico into the North American market and to reduce its reliance on Asian exports, imports, especially China, of course, and this whole kind of nearshoring that you were just mentioning about, to ramp up domestic production, and that's another really big kind of policy pillar for her. Obviously, she hasn't been long enough to see. We can't yet see the results of that, but if she does manage to to follow through on that plan, then Mexico will definitely be in a really strong position, not just now to negotiate a good deal with Trump, but also in the future in general, probably a really good, strong trading partner for the US. And I think probably really good relations between the two going forward. Much nicer relations than I'd say with with the neighbor up north, being Canada.
And also, as you say, with the decisions her government are making regarding crime and kind of fentanyl and kind of drug trafficking, that's clearly one of the things Trump takes very seriously on both borders. I mean, Canada gets a weird amount of heat for fentanyl coming across that border despite very little evidence. So as you say, if she's able to crack down domestically, that also makes Trump less angry and helps
exactly,
too. Rory, I know you were keen on Scheinbaum too. You even proposed moving her yourself.
I did.
So
I think it was an excellent move by Nadja. The main thing for me was the Trump negotiation deadline extension. I can't even think how to phrase it, but it's
how many extensions is that now?
It's a lot, and she's clearly really on Trump's good side. Like every time he writes a little thing about how he just had a call with any given world leader, sometimes he's nice, sometimes he's not, but whenever it's about Scheinbaum, he always says really nice things about her. So she's managed to charm him really effectively. And when you've got other countries like Japan, for instance, or South Korea, really strong ties with the US, they've really put a lot of effort into negotiating, working up against these tight deadlines, ending up with deals that probably aren't as good as they'd hoped, but they had to strike them because the deadline was really imminent. Whereas Scheinbaum's able to just keep pushing it back and pushing it back, probably until she'll get a much more favorable deal. It's a real testament to her Trump whispering skills, as people like to call it.
Trump whispering, an increasingly important strategy and ability in modern politics. Okay, so those are our 3 upward movements on the board this week. A lot of people moving into those real upper tiers this week. Before we move on to our losers and before we move on to the audience suggestion, I wanted to quickly shout out our magazine, Too Long. We obviously mention this every week, so I will keep it quick. But the main thing you need to know is that 1, the magazine is out now. There's no more pre-ordering, and if you order a digital edition, it will be sent immediately to your inbox. So if you're ordering digital, there's no waiting, there's no pre-ordering, it comes immediately to you. If you're ordering a physical copy, it will be shipped within a couple of days. There's currently a very slight delay because we sold out of the original inventory basically immediately. We're currently on back order, but by the time this episode comes out, we should basically have the new issues. So again, we should be shipping them almost immediately. The other reason to order now is that this probably is your last chance to get the subscriber discount on this issue. Essentially, at some point, we have to move over when you subscribe what your first copy is. And as of about a week's time, if you subscribe new, you will no longer get this issue. Your first issue you'll receive will be December's issue, which is about, actually I can show you. In fact, we maybe can show you on screen too. Oh, no, I can't show you. This is a fake test copy.
That's sad.
Oh, we can show you on screen.
Please keep that in.
It's about the new Middle East and about the state of geopolitics in the Middle East. That'll be coming out in December. But essentially, if you subscribe as of a week's time, you will no longer receive this End of the American Order issue. The first one you'll receive will be that one. And that's a great one. We're looking forward to it. So no shade on that. But if you want to subscribe and get this issue, this is your last chance. And to celebrate the fact it's your last chance, if you use code LASTCHANCE20 at checkout, you'll not only get the 20% discount you get for subscribing, which applies to every issue forever, you'll also get an additional 20% off this issue, which means if you're subscribing to the digital edition, it will no longer cost you $9.99, it will cost you £6.40. And if you're subscribing to the physical edition, it won't be $13.99, it will be $8.96, which is a 36% discount on your first copy, and then 20% discount on every copy after that. So, as I say, this is your last chance to subscribe and receive this copy, and it also is the only week you'll be able to use this additional 20% off. So, we are nearly done talking about this issue of Too Long, and as I say, this is your last opportunity. So, thank you if you have ordered already. We sold out. We had to ship thousands out in a handful of days, and we're receiving more. But honestly, it's not unlikely we'll sell out again. So if you want to subscribe, if you want to support the channel, this is your time to do it. The link is in the description, and make sure to use code LASTCHANCE20. Okay, let's move on to the audience suggestion. Okay, so every week we allow the audience to choose one person who's either added to the board or moved on the board based on the top comments from the previous episode. The top comment on the previous episode, the top comment that was explicitly calling for a change, explicitly asking to be the nominee, was someone requesting that Justin Trudeau is re-added to the board because of him allegedly dating Katy Perry. We're going to overrule that, I'm afraid. We always say it's within reason, and I think adding a former world leader for a spurious relationship with I think pop star's almost generous for Katy Perry at this stage, but there's no point to drag her into this too. But yeah, former PM and former pop star, that feels a little bit beyond our scope. So instead, we're going with Ursula von der Leyen because someone also said in last week's comments and got hundreds of likes for it that they were surprised we didn't move Ursula von der Leyen last week, which isn't explicitly them asking for them to move them, but we're going to do it anyway because it was the best high-liked suggestion we had. Who wants to start with this one? We're each going to say whether we think they're a winner or a loser. So who's going to start?
I don't mind starting.
We'll start your end then. Ursula von der Leyen, winner or loser?
I think she's a loser this week. And the timeline in my head is a bit muddled because she has been the loser for quite a few recent weeks. So we've probably covered quite a lot of the reasons why. But in just the last week, the Pfizer-gate scandal has sort of bubbled up again, which is this ongoing scandal over text messages between her and the chief executive of Pfizer during the pandemic. And it's not really about the content of those messages. It's about the transparency that these messages got deleted or got lost, and various court rulings and all sorts of things. But the thing that happened in the last week is that the commission basically decided not to contest a recent ruling that happened in May that found that the von der Leyen's commission had acted improperly in relation to those text messages, which is sort of a bit of a admission that maybe they don't think that appeal would have gone anywhere. And there's also been recent revelations that the commission actually viewed some of the messages and then let them get lost, rather than just them being a load of messages that got lost without anyone really having an eye on them. So that's not a great look.
World leaders really need to learn how to back up their messages. I mean, I know this is often an excuse, but even in the UK during COVID, there are a bunch of lost like WhatsApp messages and whatever else. Should be using secure platforms, guys. Come on, sort it out. Georgina, do you agree? Ursula von der Leyen a loser this week?
I do. And as Rory said, it does culminate a long period of several weeks where she's fallen from up on high to now, well, if we agree, bottom of the
She was
table.
really high at one point too. There was, I mean, I remember we had a discussion about like, is she the de facto leader of Europe? And like, I guess still kind of, she's still like, just her, by virtue of her position and by the growing power of like her segment of the EU in particular. But her as an individual has really fallen off recently.
When we were talking about moving von der Leyen, I was thinking, and her kind of trajectory falling over time, I was thinking when she's been high, I think it's been for her as a representative of the bloc of the EU as a whole. So when Europe's doing well, von der Leyen goes up. But when we move her down, it's because of something to do with her leadership or her own kind of like problems, Pfizergate or whatever. So that's maybe where the dichotomy is coming from. But yeah, basically to echo what Rory said, she's had a few weeks of personal problems, personal political problems with her leadership. And there were 4 that I could think of, 3 of which we've talked about on this podcast before, being the vote of no confidence, which she survived, but the fact it was tabled was not a good look. The EU budget was very poorly received all round. The Trump trade deal was criticised by a number of EU member states. And something else, the 4th thing that we haven't much talked about is this EU-China summit, which was a couple of weeks ago. And it was just a one-day summit. But it was very underwhelming. No progress was really made on key areas like China has curbed exports of its raw critical materials, which the EU depends on China for almost 99% of its supply of 17 rare earths. Wow. Which it uses for a whole load of different manufacturing different products. And this one-day summit basically showed that China still has huge leverage over the EU and still can kind of bully the EU into doing what it wants. And as much as the EU says we need a more balanced trade relationship with China, we're going to get it. Like, so far, no progress has been made on that front. And the EU still remains heavily dependent on China. So all this talk of strategic ambiguity, of bolstering Europe's own manufacturing industry, it is China still that holds all the cards. Yeah, absolutely. Najo?
Yeah, I mean, loser. I think this week particular obviously was as Georgina mentioned, the trade deal between the US and the EU. It was very, of course, poorly received. And also, I just think in general, like this trend with Ursula von der Leyen and this whole centralization of power, federalization of Europe, as people have talked about, it's just interesting to see how things are moving in like kind of opposite directions. So you've got one movement is towards this kind of, centralization that she's been at the helm of. But on the other side of things, she hasn't really kind of implemented some kind of, not necessarily policies, but a lot of the kind of pillars of like EU policy pillars like migration. There isn't really a kind of unifying blanket that covers all countries. Like the EU isn't really unified on that kind of front on a lot of issues. And I just think that kind of goes against her whole ambition for that kind of federal. I'm not saying this is her ambition only, but just that kind of federalization of Europe. But I think it's quite still fractured, and that's just one more thing I want to add.
I second that, and I think I'm playing the Zach role, like jumping off to add one final thing.
Go on, you can say one last thing.
Just one last thing. Is that I think to echo what Naja said, Europe is on the one hand wants to become more unified and wants to present this image of like being a strong bloc versus China in the east, the US in the west. But actually, when it comes down to it, and what we've seen in the past few months with issues like migration, or also issues with debt sharing and defense weapons procurement, things like that, there are so many like obstacles along the way with member states not wanting to say, like abide by Schengen or not wanting to share debt at the EU level, therefore weapons procurement and any big defense kind of scheme on the continental level becomes more difficult when there's those obstacles in place. So again, it's just showing that no matter what like image of unity the EU is trying to project, there are so many fractures and obstacles within it.
Well, von der Leyen then moving down to the very bottom of the board. Not a good time for her. It'd be interesting to look at the stats and see who's had the most calamitous fall off of the year. But von der Leyen's certainly up there. Speaking of losers and falling down the board, let's move to our losers of the week. Georgina, let's jump back to you. Who is your loser this week?
My loser this week is Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who I don't think we've moved on the board for a while. And we have talked about this event, though, on the podcast before, which is her Italy-Albania migrant deal, which was struck in 2023, came into force in 2024, and since then has faced a number of legal challenges, both from within Italy and now also at the European level. And so on Friday last week, the European Court of Justice didn't strike down the deal, but kind of presented a ruling that Italy can designate third countries as safe, but has to publicly explain the rationale for it and give its sources and cite the information for how it's making these decisions. And also that any third country designated as safe has to be safe for the entire population and not just for certain groups or parts of it. And Meloni has then responded by accusing the ECJ of overreach, saying that migration is an issue for nation states and governments to deal with rather than a legal issue or something that the courts should be involved in. But interestingly, I'm not sure this is a total loss for Meloni, because actually this debate about safe third countries and how they're designated is something that's going on within the EU Parliament and at the EU level as well, with the Commission in May, European Commission proposing 4 changes to its migration pact as a result of this pressure largely from far-right parties or hard right-wing governments like Meloni's, to effectively broaden the definition of a safe third country so that EU member states can send asylum seekers to a country that they have no proven connection with. So under pre-existing EU law and under the current EU Migration Pact, member states can only send asylum seekers to third countries if there's a proven connection. And that's generally if an asylum seeker has transited through that country on their way to Europe. But under the proposed changes, that link doesn't have to be proven, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. You know, it's essentially giving legitimacy to these offshoring proposals that this Italy-Albania migrant deal is kind of the first example of. So on the one hand, you've got the European Court of Justice battling the Meloni government on the legality of this or trying to kind of curtail it in some way. But then on the other hand, you've got the EU Commission actively considering these proposals and trying to broaden out this definition of safe third country so that offshoring becomes more normalized. And this is something definitely to keep an eye on over the next few months, because since Denmark took over the rotating EU Council presidency on the 1st of July, one of its key priorities is also to achieve a deal on migrant return policy, I think is what they call it, by the end of December. And Denmark has had a long-standing strict migration policy. And yeah, basically these offshoring deals are becoming more commonplace. And actually it may turn out in a few months' time that Meloni's Italy-Albania migrant deal becomes the archetype for similar things that we're seeing with other nation states.
For the moment, though, she is moving down from the positive to the lightly positive section. I'm curious how likely you think it is that there might be movement back in the other direction. Her exact plan has been kind of rejected at the European level, but momentum is moving in her direction ultimately. So how likely do you think it is that we will see increased normalization of proposals like Maloney's, and thus we'll see her as a bit of a successful actor in months or years to come?
I actually think it's very likely.
Okay.
I think there's so much pressure domestically on governments within Europe and also from, I guess, agitators, you might say, in the European Parliament to do something about migration, about, rising levels of asylum claims. But actually, when you look at the statistics, asylum claims to Europe have dropped between 2024. I think it's between 2024 and 2025, or it might be between 23 and 24. Sorry, I can't remember. And the way to deal with these issues is often not to just ship people off elsewhere. At least in my mind, I don't think that's practical, because you're not addressing the underlying trends that cause these waves of migration in the first place. And so I think there will be significant backlash, or at least these kinds of schemes won't work in the way that governments think they will. But as I say, because of the amount of pressure and the kind of political visibility of migration as an issue now, I think we will see more and more governments, even those that were previously opposed to schemes like the Italy-Albania deal or offshoring or partnerships with third countries. I think all those things will become a lot more commonplace. That's not to say that they'll work, but I think that is the direction that many EU governments are going in. And I think definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. Rory, let's jump over to you. Who is your loser this week?
My loser this week is Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister. And this obviously touches on some of the stuff we talked about earlier. This is because of the diplomatic tsunami of Palestinian recognition that we've had from, as we said, France, UK, Malta, Canada, possibly others, Portugal, Finland, Germany, maybe to come. Netanyahu is, it's a longer term trend, but he's overseeing a real collapse in international support, at least rhetorical support for Israel. And I think we're at the point now where you've got these countries making this move, and the response is from Netanyahu's government that recognition of Palestine is a reward for October 7th and a reward for terrorism or anti-Semitism. Those responses just look increasingly sort of desperate and implausible, because we're, I think, 22 months on from October 7th now, and the countries that are making these moves are long-time allies of Israel. They're not sort of, we're not days after October the 7th. These aren't sort of knee-jerk responses. This is very slow, calculated responses by these governments that are doing this because they've been pressured into it from people at home, but also because of the Israeli government's own actions. Like I said, we're 22 months in. They're being pushed because, there's massive man-made starvation in Gaza because of the Israeli policy. We've got more than 60,000 Palestinians who've been killed since October 7th in Gaza. Millions, the 2 or so million people in Gaza are increasingly pushed into a smaller and smaller area. And the Israeli government is also continuing with its incredibly extreme rhetoric and just sort of openly killing off any idea of a two-state solution. The Knesset recently passed a motion that sort of non-binding, but supported the idea of annexing the West Bank. This is a year after passing a motion that effectively rejected the idea of a two-state solution. So that's what's forced these governments into sort of turning against Israel and moving to recognize Palestine. What the Israeli government and military is doing in Gaza is they often defend it as saying, despite what governments outside of Israel are saying about us, we're doing this because this is necessary for the security of Israel and the Israeli people. I think that also, it just isn't holding up, because when you look at attitudes in the US, for example, there's been a massive drop off in support in the US public support of the Israeli military operation. And I know at the top level of US politics, there still is that support. And there was just recently a Senate motion that would have tried to block arms sales to Israel. That got defeated. So you do still have that political support for Israel. But underneath that level, I think there's a really growing sort of opposition to Israel, and there's like a whole new generation that is being raised to really not approve of that tight US-Israel relationship. Yeah. And I think that's a really, really dangerous game that Netanyahu is playing, thinking that at some point, I don't know how long term this will be, but at some point that's got to come back and bite Israel, I think. And I think that is, fundamentally a very bad thing for Netanyahu.
Absolutely. So Netanyahu moving from lightly negative to fully negative, slipping towards the bottom of the board there. You obviously talk about the kind of long-term impacts. I think that is interesting too, but in the immediate term, how much difference does any of this really make? Because a lot of these countries, like some of them, as you say, historically allied with Israel, normally supportive, and they are beginning to turn, and that obviously does make a difference. But it seems that attitudes within the country and the political class within Israel, their views aren't changing. Yeah. So does this international pressure, when rhetorical, make any difference? Or is it more that it symbolizes that down the line there will be less practical support too?
I think that is obviously the big question. And the recognition of Palestine I don't think is going to push Israel to change. It's more about from those countries trying to rescue the idea of the two-state solution. And these countries are saying we're going to recognize Palestine in September. That's still a month away. There will be a lot of devastation in Gaza in that time that won't be prevented by this. But I do think what recent events have demonstrated that kind of pressure, both rhetorical and actual diplomatic pressure, is the only thing that can get Israel to change course. They obviously recently slightly lifted restrictions on aid. They allowed airdrops and temporary sort of humanitarian pauses, I think they called them, which sort of everyone in the humanitarian sector says is insufficient, but it is still a sign that is still a response from the Israeli government to this outside pressure. And that does demonstrate that pressure can be effective. So I think it depends if the countries we're talking about look at that and think, okay, well, now we need to step up the pressure even more to get more, to get sort of greater change in action from the Israeli government. Or do they look at that and think, okay, now we can ease off because they've done this small thing? I think that's the question that will sort of change how things going forwards. Yeah.
And as Rory wrote about in your Israel piece in Too Long, the International Crisis Group has pointed out this cycle that Israel goes through when Western governments or the international community condemns its actions, and then Israel goes, okay, fine, we'll give you some concessions, we'll open a few aid corridors, or we'll allow airdrops, or we'll allow a few aid trucks in, enough to get European governments to back off for a bit. The issue goes out. Then we get more reports in again about malnutrition rates rising, famine being on the cusp, if not already happening. And then there's more pressure. And then Israel again goes, okay, we'll ease off again. And again, it's exactly what Rory said about, is this cycle just going to continue indefinitely until there is no Palestinian state left whatsoever? And also, we've seen in the past week that the UK has started giving medical treatment to starving Palestinians that have been taken out of the Gaza Strip. And again, it's a horrifying thing and something that we couldn't imagine Starmer doing, say, 2 years ago. The situation is so desperate now, but it's also become so clear that the US really is the only country that can make a difference to what Israel is doing or not doing. And I think the strong risk of all of these Palestinian state recognitions is that it's come far too late, and that efforts to make this two-state solution happen is also decades too late. And I don't know what's going to happen next. But there's a chance as well, you could argue that this is almost a win for Netanyahu, because it gives him these recognitions of Palestine, give him yet another excuse to continue this same line of rhetoric that we've heard for so long of Israel has to defend itself, no one else is going to do it for us, and point at all these European governments and say, look, now they're validating the terrorists, like this is why we have to keep doing what we're doing. So you could view it that way as well. But in any case, yeah, I think it's the right move to send Netanyahu down because, as Rory says, I think the long-term implications, like very long-term, are bad for Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. We will obviously continue to follow this as the weeks go on and as potentially policies change in other countries. But yeah, for now, Netanyahu moving to the negative section of the board. Finally, Nadia, who is your loser this week?
My loser of this week is the Malaysian Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a new addition as well, hat.
Wow.
Yeah,
New person, new
10 out of
hat.
10 hat as well.
Yeah.
Great hat.
Great hat. But loser, unfortunately.
Oh.
So
Even despite the hat.
despite the hat, some may
Crazy.
say he's still the loser of this week. I am saying. And this is the reason being is last week, there were essentially really big mass protests against Anwar Ibrahim, who has been Prime Minister since 2022. He came into office on essentially anti-corruption platform, vowing to bring back stability to Malaysia, a country which since 2018 was plagued by political instability, failed governments, a changeover of leaders on multiple occasions. He came to prominence and he formed a unity government, and he was widely seen as bringing stability back to Malaysia. In the meantime, he promised a handful of reforms, specifically some economic reforms. Another priority of his tenure was to reduce the fiscal deficit of Malaysia. To do so, however, he's had to take some unpopular routes, which have been essentially raising taxes or cutting subsidies, specifically fuel subsidies. And this has resulted in a big high cost of living for ordinary Malaysians. As a result, many people went out to protest against his tenure, saying he's failed to deliver on his reforms. And then while he's brought stability to the country, people are essentially are worse off than they were a few years ago. And yeah, I mean, there have been calls for him to step down as well. So he is moving down this week. On that note, though, his polling is still relatively okay. And a lot of that is attributed to the fact that he's managed to maintain some stability in the political instability in the country. And there's also a kind of an international dimension in that he's... so Malaysia is for instance, Malaysia is the chair of this year's ASEAN organization. So he's taken the lead on all the policies for, those group of Southeastern Asian countries that make ASEAN. And there are some supporters of Ibrahim who say he's kind of pushing Malaysia on the international stage and, kind of creating a picture of Malaysia as a kind of leader in that region. Most recently, for instance, the peace talks between Cambodia and Thailand were done in Malaysia. So yeah, kind of, you've got two sides of the coin, with supporters saying that, he's pulling down fiscal deficit and he's putting us on the international stage, but also at the same time, cost of living. And we're seeing this, with so many countries protesting cost of living anyway, but he is moving down this week. And thought we'd get some more Southeast Asian recognition and more hat recognition, although they're not on the same par as each other. But
no. And generally, though, headwear does seem to skew more towards the bottom of the board. We've got 5 in the bottom half, 3 in the top half.
Is there a correlation there? Or?
I don't know. Someone needs to run the maths. I don't know how you run the maths on that.
I think we might need to do it.
We'll get some data scientists in to run the hat maths. But for the moment, Ibrahim is being added to the board and being added in the lightly negative section. What do you think this tells us more broadly about Malaysia? You say that prior to his kind of entry into government and him winning the election, it was a period of chaos and kind of political turmoil in the country. Is there a risk that were he to be kicked out or removed from office, we would return to that? Or do you think we've turned a corner with Malaysia more broadly politically?
Yeah, I think he did kind of he has represented a turning corner. His story is actually also pretty interesting. He was under the former leadership, he was the finance minister who was kicked out and sent to prison. And he was in solitary confinement for so long that apparently he read all of Shakespeare's complete works 4 times.
Wow.
So safe to say, Malaysian, the political governance of Malaysia is definitely, has changed and has taken a U-turn ever since he has returned to power. And there is this, his polling is still doing well for that specific reason. There is a lot more unity on these issues. So I don't necessarily think he will be kicked out of power anytime soon. It's just a similar trend that's, we're seeing in so many countries, whether it's in Southeast Asia, whether it's in America, whether it's in Europe. People, unhappy with the high cost of living are across the world. Malaysia is prone to that exact same trend as well. But I don't think he will be kicked out of power, and I don't think there is a necessary danger of a return to political instability soon. But that's my answer.
We'll see.
We'll see.
But for the moment, just slightly negative.
Just slightly negative.
Speaking of which, we probably should discuss who our ultimate winner and ultimate loser of the week are, because we can't just have lightly negatives. We have to have ultimate winners and losers. So let's move to the final part of the show. Okay, so the way this works is we're going to be deciding the ultimate winner and ultimate loser of the week. For each, we get to vote for one winner and one loser. And if we have unanimity among us, if we all vote for the same winner or we all vote for the same loser, that person becomes our ultimate winner or ultimate loser and moves again on the board an additional spot. Obviously, for some people, they're already at the top and the bottom, so that would just involve a plus or a negative number. But this is an opportunity for us to move someone again if we all agree that they have been winning or losing enough to justify that. Let's start with our ultimate winner of the week. Your options are Bukele, Macron, or Scheinbaum. Okay, Rory, let's start down your end. Who is your ultimate winner this week?
My ultimate winner is Claudia Scheinbaum. I think she's just demonstrated her skills in dealing with Trump, and it's going well.
Georgina? That face suggests we're not having unanimity this week.
No, we're not. Sorry. My ultimate winner is French President Emmanuel Macron. I think because of how much of a gamble it was, assuming that other countries would follow his recognition of Palestine, but they have indeed.
Nadia, who is your ultimate winner?
Mine is Claudia Scheinbaum. I just think that there was so much uncertainty when she took over AMLO, whether she'll be able to continue his policies, but I think she's managed to not only continue but surpass expectations. So I think, she's moving up.
It obviously doesn't matter now because we don't have consensus, but I also went for Scheinbaum. Broadly seems to be doing very well domestically, and also the whole Trump whisperer influence is obviously increasingly important. But you're right.
Would she have got a number if she'd moved twice? Because she's already on the top.
She would have got a +1, but it's okay. Macron is also a good shout. There's still time.
There's still time for women.
Yes. Women aren't over yet because of this, but it is a setback. Your options for the ultimate loser of the week include famous woman Ursula von der Leyen. Be careful. Meloni, Netanyahu, and Anwar Ibrahim.
And we should point out that we realised earlier that Meloni is breaking up with Edi Rama. The Italy-Albania migrant deal is falling apart before our eyes.
Visually on the board, they have shifted apart.
He's going to be gutted.
We can move him down too if you want. Rory, who is your ultimate loser this week?
My ultimate loser is Benjamin Netanyahu. I feel like the scale of things is just pretty massive at the moment, and it felt weird to do the other ones.
Georgina?
For the same reason, I've also gone for Benjamin Netanyahu.
I've gone for Ursula von der Leyen. I think for Benjamin Netanyahu, the recognition of Palestine as a state, while Macron has, set the trail blazing to do it. So it's a lot of the other countries are still conditional. They still set conditions. They still haven't done it yet. There's still time until that happens. And also, Gaza's been devastated so much that there isn't really a state to recognize in a two-state solution outcome.
Sure.
And Ursula von der Leyen, she's Queen of Europe crown is slipping, I think.
Whoa.
The cracks are showing. Yeah.
No.
So she's going down.
I always look forward to seeing what additional stuff you've drawn on your board.
Right?
It's fun. We don't have unanimity, and we definitely don't because I also went von der Leyen. So we're split 2-2. I kind of agree with Nadia on the kind of recognition of Palestine thing. And also I buy the argument Georgina was making of the fact that to some extent this isn't a pure loss. This is a win when it comes to his kind of ideology and his arguments in favor of continuing.
Can I also just add as well? I mean, we still see like a lot of his far right ministers who are, you know, top positions in his government who are still like spewing out all of this kind of like, you know, genocidal rhetoric that's just kind of still being allowed to carry on, which, so if he's not, he hasn't even been able to change his government or like, you know, make some kind of hard decisions there, it's very hard to see how he'll be able to like crack down on, you know, sorting Palestine stuff out. If people are still, his politicians are still, you know, just not on very, very two different pages, but yeah.
Okay, so this is how things stand at the end of the episode, and you'll have to join us again next week to see how people move next time. Remember, you can always have your say. Let us know in the comments who you think we should either add to the board or move on the board next week. And the top comment will be the one that we move. Also, of course, remember to like comments and to kind of back up other people's opinions, because it is the most liked thing that wins, not the thing that gets commented the most times. Also worth noting that as of next week, we're slightly changing the schedule of our podcast releases. So World Leader Leaderboard will be released on Thursdays rather than Wednesdays. And our other podcasts, that's Starmageddon and Editorial, will be rotating still. They're still coming out every other week, but that will be coming out on Tuesdays rather than Fridays. So your next episode of World Leader Leaderboard is due out next Thursday. So it's slightly longer to wait. Either way, we will see you next week and we will be moving more people. We'll see you then.
Silent wave.
The silent wave.